In the summer and fall of 2000, the Train Time team made several trips to Massachusetts to film trains on the Boston and Albany line. Between Boston, Massachusetts and Albany, New York, the line is divided into subdivisions for railroad traffic control. The Berkshire subdivision starts at milepost 92 in Springfield, Massachusetts, and goes to Schodack near Albany, New York. Our show starts at Middlefield, Massachusetts at milepost 129. The Evergreen containers are a shipment of goods from Taiwan. This trailer train is headed to Boston, and many of the trailers are carrying mail from the West Coast. These trailers are referred to as TOF, which means trailers on flat cars. Another train at milepost 129 is an auto rack train. Every day a train comes to New England filled with automobiles. Each train car can carry between 7 and 10 vehicles depending on the size of the car or truck. At milepost 130, the trains travel between two ledges. This location makes for great shots of trains from about 60 feet above the cut. Another auto rack train filled with automobiles heads to Boston. Typically, there are about 100 auto racks in each train. Middlefield, a mixed train heads west with a variety of rail cars. In Chester, Massachusetts, we catch another mixed train headed west. Chester is a former railroad town with a rich railroad history. Incorporated in 1783, Chester was chosen as the location for helper engines to push trains through the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. In 1841, the Western Railroad, later known as the Boston and Albany Railroad, arrived in Chester. The railroad is credited with being the oldest mainline mountain railroad in the world. Chester had about 150 families working for the railroad in the late 1800s. When the Boston and Albany Railroad started building imposing stone stations in the major towns along its route, Chester was left with its wooden station. Chester was known as the cheapest town on the railroad. Chester did not sell very many tickets on the railroad because so many residents had free passes. They all worked for the railroad, so they didn't have to buy tickets. Chester was the first place in America where emery was discovered. The entire grinding industry began in Chester. Abrasive materials were produced in Chester until 1980, a 100-year run. The Lakeshore Limited runs daily from Boston and New York City to Chicago, Illinois, 959 miles. The Lakeshore Limited gets its name because it runs for many miles along the shore of Lake Erie. Back into the Berkshires and Middlefield, a trailer train heads west with an interesting variety of trailers. Maersk, from the country of Denmark, is one of the largest shipping companies in the world. At the end of the train are trailers carrying mail. In Becket, Massachusetts, we watch a mixed train go over the west branch of the Westfield River. The river snakes through the woods, and the railroad tracks cross the river more than 20 times in 11 miles. There are many scenic locations in the Berkshires that make for interesting photography. The Boston Subdivision handles trains from Boston to Springfield, Massachusetts. In Warren, Massachusetts, we see a train headed west with cars filled with a variety of goods and some empty cars. Warren was incorporated in 1741 and was named for General Joseph Warren, who died at Bunker Hill during the Revolutionary War. Warren Pumps began its operations in 1897 and manufactures municipal, industrial, and commercial pumps. We catch another mixed train going by the Westfield station on its way to Selkirk for reclassification to western destinations. Westfield is known as the Whip City. During the horse and buggy days in the 19th century, Westfield was an important manufacturer of buggy whips. In Ashland, Massachusetts, Conrail with CSX power slowly moves a mixed train through town. In the 1830s, the Boston and Worcester Railroad, which became the Boston and Albany Railroad, helped attract mills and shoe shops in Ashland. Ashland has the distinction of being the home of inventor Henry Warren. He developed the Warren synchronizing timer in 1916. It made the synchronous electric clocks possible by keeping alternating current flowing from power plants at a consistent 60 cycles per second. The Warren synchronizing timers were produced in Ashland until 1979. The black Staley tank cars are used for transporting corn syrup, which is a sweetener used in many of our food products. As you can see by the large number of Staley tank cars, we use a lot of corn syrup. The beautiful stone station is one which was built by the Boston and Albany Railroad and is similar to other stations along the line. As we wait for the train in Lenox Corner, did you spot the trespassing rabbit? The Omnia tank cars from Vermont carry limestone slurry used in the paper industry to make high-grade paper, such as that used by the National Geographic magazine. West Brookfield, we catch the North Shore Limited near the end of its 959-mile journey from Chicago to Boston. Palmer is a favorite train watcher's location. Palmer was incorporated in 1775 and became known as the town of 7 railroads: the Boston and Albany Railroad, Central Vermont, Boston and Maine, Ware River Railroad, Central Mass Railroad, Hamden Railroad, and Southern New England Railroad all passed through Palmer. Today, New England Central, Mass Central, CSX, and Amtrak meet in Palmer. The old stone station is in desperate need of repair. Worcester, Massachusetts is a major hub for railroad traffic. This train moves into town and waits for clearance before continuing west. Worcester, Massachusetts was named for the city of Worcester in England. Worcester is the end of the commuter line for this train. It now heads back to Boston on its evening run. Worcester is about halfway between Boston and Springfield, and because of its location, it is called the heart of the Commonwealth. It was first settled in 1673, became incorporated in 1722, and was chartered as a city in 1848. Each city seems to have something to be proud of. Esther Howland from Worcester designed and manufactured the first American Valentine's cards in 1847. About 1,200 women worked in the Worcester Corset Factory, which was the largest employer of women in the United States in 1908. We hope you've enjoyed watching trains in the Boston and Berkshire subdivisions of the Boston and Albany Railroad line. Thank you for watching Train Time.